I can sum it up in 4 words: vision, purpose, passion, and creativity. Those are the 4 things I want to talk to you about this afternoon, and how they all go together to make something truly superlative. Yeah, I'll show you some of my images, but the visions that I'm really interested in exploring, they're not photographic. They're the visions we have for our lives, personally and professionally, and just how extraordinary they can be. So how does one create a vision? Where does it start? For me, it started a long time ago. I grew up here in the Midwest. I grew up in a family with a dad that used to tell me stories. My father told me lots and lots and lots of stories. And all of my dad's stories had lessons. I began to hate stories. Lessons. Most of those lessons, right over my head, but occasionally one of them would stick. And I want to begin with a story. It's an old story. I'm sure some of you know it. But I tell it because it was a story that really changed my perspective on life. That really gave me the first sense of what a vision could be. It told me a story about 2 men laboring in a courtyard in medieval Italy. And they sat, in the heat of the noonday sun, drenched in sweat, chipping at blocks of marble. One man's face downcast, shoulders bent, muscles straining, and a priest, crossing the courtyard, looked down and said, "What are you doing, my son?" And without looking up, the man answered, "I am chipping stone." The priest turned to the other man. His shoulders too were bent, his muscles strained, but his face was a smile, and his eyes just full of that joyful effort and passion. "What are you doing?" "I am building a cathedral. I am building a cathedral." That story got to me. Because I kept thinking, these 2 guys are looking at exactly the same thing, and one is a stone shipper and the other is a cathedral builder, and the only difference was vision. I knew which one I wanted to be. No idea how to do that. There are not a lot of books on cathedral building for young men around, and I was a kid. I still held that maxim, I won't believe it until I see it. We all start out that way. We all start out needing those teachers, those mentors, those seminal experiences in our lives that show us what's possible. This was one of those experiences for me, the National Geographic. Maybe it was for many of you. My family took this magazine long before I was born. By the time I got to be able to read, I'd grab it when I came into the house. I'd take it upstairs. I'd read it at night. My dad would say, "Turn out the light, go to bed." Turn the light back on. I'd get a flashlight. I'd do whatever it took to stay up and stare at the pictures in this little yellow book. Pictures that showed me the possibilities the world had to offer. I'm not the only geographic freak out there. I know that. Well, that's good. But I had an elderly gentleman come up out of a talk I gave recently after the show. He said, "I love the Geographic. I read the Geographic because it takes me to places I will never go." It's the same reason I read Playboy. I never thought I'd shoot for them. I never thought I'd work for them. But they began to influence my vision long before I even knew I was a photographer. Because they had a wonderful vision. So simple, yet so profound. What they charged me with every time they sent me out was to celebrate what was right with the world rather than wallowing in what was wrong. That's why we keep these silly yellow magazines. It's a national sacrilege to throw away a Geographic. You know that? If all the Geographics in the country disappeared at one time, half the houses would fall in on themselves. Because they're supported by big yellow columns in the basement. And if you don't have them, your parents do, I guarantee it, Because they celebrate what's right with the world. And that's what you folks do. You train, you teach, you inspire your people to celebrate what's right in their lives. The very best that they have. Remember that. So I'd look at those pictures with that vision and I'd fall in love. I'd fall in love with the world, and I'd feel what you always feel when you fall in love. I'd feel passion. That energy that rises up from within. Great visions do that. They release passion. That energy just seems encoiled inside them. I'd look at those pictures with that vision and that energy, and in that moment, I transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. That's the moment of creativity. To me, that's all really creativity is, that moment where we look at the ordinary, but what we see is extraordinary. And we do that when we fall in love with ourselves, with our spouse, with our family, with our team, with our community, with our country, with the world. At that moment, we stop being stone chippers and start to be cathedral builders and begin to focus an extraordinary vision for our lives. I had another experience when I was a freshman at Dartmouth College. Another experience that filled me with great vision and passion. And I remember one fall evening, the whole school gathering in a place called Webster Hall to hear a grand old man say his poetry. And it was the poet Robert Frost, just the year before he died. 83 years old. For 2 hours, he just held us in the palm of his hands, igniting us with his visions. And then he read a poem called Two Tramps in Mud Time. He read words I'll never forget. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation, as my two eyes make one inside. Only when love and need are one, and the work is play for want mistakes, is the deed ever really done for heaven and the future's sake. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation. My vocation, what I had to do and they paid me to do. My avocation, what I couldn't help but do. What I love to do. As my two eyes make one inside. And as I listened to Frost, I realized that on the one hand, he was saying, do what you love. Do what you love. Everybody in this room gets to do that. That's amazing. You are so lucky. Do what you love. But the converse of that, he was also telling me, love what you do. Love what you do. Every day when you get up and are doing your business, it's not all cool stuff, right? There is stuff that's hard, and you have to be able to fall in love with that too. Because if you can do both, boy, the world is your oyster. That night, Frost took me out of the ordinary, showed me the extraordinary, and made me feel it. So I've had visionary teachers and mentors. I've been shown passion and possibility. But as everybody in this room knows, you can't live it through others. Eventually, you got to do it yourself. Eventually, you got to move from imagination to imagine action. And I think the first time that happened to me is when I got to be a senior at Dartmouth. I'd been a drama major. I had no idea how I was going to make my living as a dramatist. I did not want to go to New York and starve. So being a smart kid, I applied and I was accepted into Harvard Business School. My father said, thank God. Kid's going to be off the dole, it's all going to work. Probably would have worked out fine, except that spring term of my senior year, 3 of us guys got together one night and we just began to vision, to dream, to imagine what we would do after graduation if we could do anything we wanted. And the hour got later and the visions got grander, and sometime after midnight we came up with this idea of kayaking 1,100 miles up the coast of Japan. Seemed like a great idea at the time, you know? And I said, I'll make a movie out of it. I'd never made a movie before in my life. But I got up the next morning with my first real vision and the passion that that vision brought with it. And so I withdrew my acceptance to Harvard and applied out to UCLA Film School to learn how to make movies. My father said, we've lost him. I went out to what he still calls the land of nuts and flakes. I got into the school. I got with some of the second-year graduate students because they knew something about making movies. I sure did. And together we wrote this great letter to the National Geographic Society about this hot young film director from Hollywood, who was going to make this great movie for me. sent it off. Lo and behold, I get a letter. I get a letter back from the Geographic. It said, "Dear Mr. Jones, we're very interested in your proposal. We'd like to have you come to Washington, and when you do, bring some samples of your work." So in a week and a half, I made a 15-minute documentary on Olvera Street, little Mexican street in the middle of LA. Picked it up from the lab on a Monday morning, got on a plane, flew to Washington, walked into a Tuesday meeting, said, "This is just a little something I picked off the shelf." It was still wet. And they looked at it. It was a terrible little film, but it was mine. And they finally said, "Okay, we'll tell you what we'll do. We'll send along our Hollywood film crews to follow you guys up the coast. You take the trip, we'll make the movie." 23 years old, I stood up at the meeting and I said, "No way." I said, "If I don't make the film, it doesn't get made." And they said, "It doesn't get made." So I came back to my dorm room at UCLA and I am bummed, man. You know, I had the vision, I had the passion, I could see that movie. And I was scared too. I just got whopped in that meeting. And I thought, what's the fear, Dewitt? Do you really think they're going to drag you out behind the Geographic and break your thumbs if you ask twice? What's another perspective? What's another focus? So I sat down and I wrote Mel Payne, the president of the Society, a letter. Poured out my heart to him. Now, poured out my vision to him about why I ought to make that movie. And he read that letter and he caught that vision. Because 3 weeks later, he called the head of the television department and said, "Give the kid the money and let him go." And there I was, having never made a major film before in my life, about to make my first for National Geographic. Went to Japan, paddled up the coast. I made the film. It was shown on TV in this country. It was syndicated in Europe. It was on the BBC. And wow, I was a filmmaker. And I learned something incredibly important from that. I didn't really have the words to it till years later when I saw that movie Dead Poets Society. Remember that? Stars Robert Williams. He plays an English teacher. One day he runs into his class, leaps up on his desk, raises his hand and yells, "Carpe diem!" Seize the day. Seize the day. That's what that was all about. I learned if you pushed hard enough on life, it connected and pushed back. I learned that I could dream, the wildest dreams imaginable, and at least have a chance of manifesting them into reality. And I learned it at a very deep level at a very young age. And that film was the beginning of what evolved into a 20-year career shooting first movies and then stills for the Geographic. Out there now, living that vision, celebrating what was right with the world. Except now it wasn't a question of I won't believe it till I see it. Now it was, I'll see it because I believe it. I'll see it because I believe it. They'd send me out to places I'd never been. I believed there would be beautiful landscapes to photograph. They'd appear. I believed those landscapes would be full of wonderful people. They'd be there. Celebrating what's right with the world. It was a vision that had purpose and passion for everybody in the organization. Do you have a vision like that? Not for Beachbody, I know that one, but for you, yourself, a vision that you could distill down into 6 words, your own private bumper sticker. A vision that every day when you got up and said those 6 words, you said, yes. Because as Christine said yesterday, we're not out there pushing product. We're there, we lead with vision. We lead with vision. Spend time with your vision. Bring it into focus, because when the vision is clear, when your vision is just juicy enough, then passion and creativity are there as well. And when passion and creativity are there, discipline and commitment are non-issues. I know that. I know that because I lived it. If we could have the lights, please. I lived it. All of a sudden, I wasn't looking at the pictures on that printed page anymore. I was there. I was there, and what an incredible place there was. From the tallest mountains, to rivers drenched in sunlight, to waterfalls and rainbows. I kept thinking of the words of the poet Robinson Jeffers, who wrote, "Is it not by his high superfluousness that we know our God? Is it not by his high superfluousness that we know our God? For to meet a need is natural, animal, mineral. But to throw rainbows over the rain or hide them in seashells. Everywhere I looked, there would be amazing beauty for me to photograph, and in those landscapes were lessons that would change my life. The conservationist John Muir once wrote, when we try and pick out any one thing by itself, we'll find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And the more I photographed, the more nature showed me that connection and beauty graced by light. And yet, you know, in the geographic's view, man was not something separate from this. Just as magical, just as unique as anything else on the planet. And the more I just went out and celebrated the best in humankind, the more I could see it. I could see it in the faces of those at work, or the body language of those at play, those in their youth, or in their age. Can you believe this guy? I thought this was going to be a good picture before he smiled, right? I could see it. I could see that light. That light that shines not on us, but from within us. From within us when we have the courage to let it out. It was the same light I'd seen in nature that didn't seem to have to trust to expose itself, but just graced us every day with the delicacy of a flower or the light of a breaking storm. And it was my job to celebrate it, the very best we had to offer. And the more I believed it, the more I would see it. Everywhere I looked, the banquet was laid. And yet the more I photographed with the geographic, the more I found this strange tension growing up between the worldview of the geographic and the worldview that I've been raised in since I was a kid. You know, my intellectual paradigm, if you will, my stone chipper's paradigm. I mean, you all know it. The allocation of scarce resources, the law of the jungle, eat or be eaten, my win is your loss, second place is the first loser. I'm sorry, I saw that on a t-shirt the other day. That is a very depressing way to look at life. Now, maybe it's how we had to look at it when we dragged ourselves to the mouth of our cave and ran into a saber-toothed tiger, but come on. Everybody in this room is playing life at a higher level than that. And yet when we get scared or fearful, that's the paradigm that rises up. But that's not what nature was showing me. Nature was showing me incredible beauty and possibility, standing just beyond the rat race, saying, hello, hello. All was there if I was open enough to see it. I mean, Mother Nature never stood in front of a forest and said, there is one great photograph hidden here. One photographer will find it, and the rest of you will be hopeless losers. Nature said, absolutely. Nature said, how many rolls you got, Dewitt? Bring it on. Bring it on. I'll fill it up. I'll fill it up with beauty and possibility beyond your wildest imagination, right down to my tiniest seed. And that was just a much more elegant philosophy, a much more compassionate way of looking at the universe. And at some point, I just decided to embrace it. I just decided that if I had a choice between a world based on scarcity and fear, and one based on possibility, then man, I was choosing possibility. And then no matter how dry and desolate, no matter how bleak and devoid of possibilities a situation might seem, that I would just believe that if I could fall in love with it, I could find a perspective. In this case, just by dropping down into that slot canyon and looking back the other way, a perspective that would transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Nature was sharing with me one of her most important lessons. Time and again, she would show me that there's more than one right answer. There's more than one right answer. It seems so simple, but it is the key to creativity. There are 1,000 ways to come at any challenge, to find that extraordinary view. And I know it so easily from my photography, but sometimes it's just so hard to bring over the rest of my life. They sent me to the little town of Smith River, They raise about 80% of the Easter lilies in the country around that little town, and that was the story I had to tell. So I got a perspective where I got picked lilies and unpicked lilies, and the boy picking them, and good body language as he puts them in the box, a little bit of the region's architecture and the weather. One right answer. Pretty good one. But boy, I'd never think of stopping there. I mean, immediately I grabbed another lens, walked over a couple rows, knelt down, and found another right answer. Same parameters of the problem, now seen from a totally different point of view. And my favorite right answer that day was this one. This is an advanced levitation technique that I'll be teaching in a breakout. You know, somebody had a copper in the fields. I got a chance, got a ride, got up a couple hundred feet, looked down, saw the extraordinary and the ordinary. 3 right answers. So many things begin to change in your life when you come at it from the perspective of more than one right answer. I mean, first of all, you don't stop at the initial right answer. Come on, that's just doing your job. If any of you stopped at the first right answer, you would not be here in this room today. But the kick is that when you really believe it, then as you press out looking for that next right answer, which you're asked to do every day, you do so not in terror, but comfortably, knowing it's going to be there for you. And you really do begin to embrace change rather than fear it. You really do hit the day with a sense of possibility, not paralysis. And you just get more and more comfortable with reframing a problem into an opportunity. They sent me up to the Selkirk Mountains of British Columbia. Gorgeous area, gorgeous area. And I'm wandering around, I came to a field of dandelions. I should have been ecstatic, but I was not in a seize the day kind of mood. And I took a snapshot, I looked out over the field, I said, the light's not quite right, I'll come back tomorrow. I didn't engage. We all know what happens when you don't engage. Tomorrow turns into the next day turns into the next week, and by the time I got back to that field, no more dandelions. I had puffballs. I wanted dandelions, I had puffballs, and I'm just about to leave when this little voice in my head goes, what's here to celebrate? What are you falling in love with? You wanted dandelions. You got puffballs. 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 Pretty soon I'm down on the ground with the puffballs. I'm on top of the puffballs. I'm underneath the puffballs. And all of a sudden, whoa. Whoa, that extraordinary view. It always seemed to be there if I was open enough to find it. So when we come at the world from that perspective of more than one right answer, not only do we get easily to reframe problems into opportunities, we also begin to lose our fear of mistakes or setbacks. This is the Butter and Eggs Day Parade in Petaluma, California. Yes, that's over there. I lived in Petaluma for 9 years, and I raised my kids there, and they'd have this festival every spring, and I'd get out there and photograph. One year I saw this veteran handing flags to the kids beside the road, and I thought, great shot, right? So I'm going to nail it. So I slap on a telephoto lens, and I ran over there, and I missed it. Nobody's given anything to anybody in this shot. It's a mistake, but we don't learn without making mistakes. In fact, do you know that the average geographic article, when we shot in film, was shot in 400 rolls of film? That's over 14,000 tries to get the 30 that go in the magazine. And now with digital, it's twice that. I'm not thinking about making mistakes. I'm looking for the next right answer. Did I get it? No, I got E.T.'s hand over there. You know, amateur photographers will come up to me and they'll say, Dewitt, how many good ones did you get in an 8-gig card? And I say, look, I'm sorry. That's the amateur question. That's the question based on fear of making mistakes. I turn it back to him. I said, that's the amateur question. The professional question is, did you get it? Did you get it? I mean, we all know when those right answers come into focus in our life, they just go ka-chunk and you got it. But it doesn't happen unless you're willing to press out on the edge of your own comfortable envelope, to look for that next right answer, to take that risk. I mean, come on, it is not trespassing to go beyond your own boundaries. How many good ones to get an 8 gig car? No. Did you get it? So how do we answer that question? Yes, every time. When I take off after an extraordinary vision, there were 4 steps that I try and go through. And the first one was to train my technique. Train my technique. Because vision without technique is blind. It's fine to have a wonderful vision, but if you don't have the technique and technology to manifest it into reality, you've got nothing. So I'd spend days, weeks, months, years with my technique, f-stops and shutter speeds and strobes, so that when nature did open a window of opportunity, I wasn't worried about what lens was on my camera. I was there ready to capture it. I call this one midlife rebirth. So first I want to train my technique. And then I want to put myself in the place of most potential. If nature's going to open up multiple windows of opportunity for us, where do we have the best chance of finding them? So I was doing a book on Lake Powell, and I was flying in from taking some aerials one morning, and I looked down, and some of you can see it if you're close enough. There's a little road over there on the right, and at the end there's a little car. God, I didn't even know anybody could get out there. But seeing it, I knew it was possible. So I came back to my campsite. I looked at the maps. That point was in the perfect direction. I looked at another book, figured out the day I wanted to be there, rented a 4-wheel drive, stuffed it with provisions, bumped all the way out to that overlook. But boy, I was there in the place of most potential the night the full moon rose over the lake. And when you're there in the place of most potential with your technique down, well, those right answers just keep coming. Train your technique. Put yourself in the place of most potential. And then the next step, it seems like the easiest, but I really think it's the hardest, and that's just to open to possibilities. Possibilities you never dreamed of. So I'm doing a little story on Marine World. I'd shot the killer whales and the dolphins and the water skiers and the tigers. I had it. I was going back to the car. And just out of the corner of my eye, I see this thing called a dancing fountain. I mean, you've seen it. The water comes out of one, goes in a big parabola, goes into another, then out of that, into the next one. Looks like a big worm going across the horizon, right? And this kid has his hand on the source. And he's waiting, and so am I. And he's ready, and so am I. And I know what that next right answer is going to be, and man, I nailed it. But I'm not shutting down. I'm not closing off possibilities. I'm not, because if I did, I never would have seen this one. You know, just being open to possibilities we never dreamed of. When the great photographer Minor White would go out to photograph, he would never say, "What will I take today?" Rather, he would ask, "What will I be given today?" And I would add, will I be open enough to recognize it? Train your technique. Put yourself in the place of most potential. Open to possibilities. And then finally, focus your vision by celebrating what's right in the situation. Live that vision at the geographic. So no matter how weird a situation I'd walk into, the first thing I'm going to ask is, what am I falling in love with? What's here to celebrate? Well, in this case, for me, it's easy, because that happens to be my daughter. Most dads would help their daughter in that situation. Dad, I'm turning blue. Don't worry, I got color film. And yet, if I was afraid to make mistakes, you know, so what I want to do is I want to look and see what's really exciting me. What's right with this situation? Because when I can get a lock on that, then I can use all my technique and technology to enhance that and let the rest fall away. Instead of starting out, as we so often do, by griping about what's wrong with the situation. What's right with that? In your business, especially with your spouse or your partner and your family, what's right with it? Because that connects us with our passion. That emancipates the energy. By celebrating what's right, we find the energy to fix what's wrong. As Michelangelo once wrote, I saw an angel in the stone, carved to set it free. I saw an angel in the sky and carved to set it free. So that just became the way I would shoot. They'd send me out to amazing places like Rose Spit at the top of Graham Island and the Queen Charlotte's of British Columbia. And on that amazing piece of real estate, the Haida Indians believed that mankind first came into existence when Raven opened up a clamshell and let him out. And I was lucky enough to be there one evening with two Haida dancing on the beach. And this was the first shot with the drummer in the background, the boy dancing in the foreground with the paddle. And I'm saying, what am I falling in love with? What's exciting me? What's here to celebrate? And at that moment, it was just the boy's face. So I took my telephoto and zoomed in on that. And I'm loving this picture, but even as I'm taking it, this little voice in my head says, Dewitt, Dewitt, you're too close. You've forgotten who this boy is or where he is. It's now just a shot of a child. It's no longer a shot of a Haida. And so even though this was a really nice picture, easily, quickly, comfortably, I let it go. Zoomed back a bit, picked up the paddle. Much better photograph, much better storytelling. In fact, the Geographic agreed and ran it as the opening spread in the article. And what I began to see is that, life is not about finding the right answer. It's not even about finding another right answer. What life is about is continually finding the next right answer. Continually finding the next right answer, twisting that focus ring of our lives back and forth, keeping that extraordinary vision in focus. And the more I did that, and this is so important, the more I did it in my photography and in my life, the more I would find that the difference between a good frame and a truly great frame was usually measured in millimeters, not miles. That close all the time if I was looking to sleep. Good frame, a morning glory on the beach in Maui, 10 inches away. Great frame, great frame. Good frame, a cowboy in Bryce Canyon, believe it or not, named Binky. I'm taking Binky's picture and I'm loving it, but even as I'm taking it, I watch another cowboy walk out of the barn behind him. And as he crosses the threshold of the door, this beautiful shaft of light hit his face. And so as he moved away, I just backed Binky up about 30 feet. Great frame, great frame. Good frame, the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset with the new moon rising, man. How does it get any better? 15 minutes later. Great frame, great frame. When we believe it, we'll see it. So I'm looking out into the audience and I'm seeing some heads going up and down. You folks know some of these techniques. You wouldn't be here at this level if you didn't. So my question today is, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? How do each one of you take it to the next level? That's a question to never stop asking in your life. I'm asking you today about me. Thinking back over my whole career, trying to figure out what it takes for me to take it to the next level. Thinking back to the very beginning when I first had the courage to stick my head out there and begin to go. And I got out there, I had goals and I had aspirations. I was working, I was flapping. I remember there was a lot of flapping going on in the beginning, competing with all the others who were out there working and flapping right next to me. But I got better at what I did, just like you guys have. And I got up on the step and it began to clear out a little bit. There weren't so many flappers. And no matter how good I got, there were always others way up above me. So high I could hardly see them, and they weren't even moving their wings, How do you get to that level in life? Well, I'm lucky enough to live on the island of Molokai between Oahu and Maui over the Orange. In the largest sea cliffs in the world, they fall about 3,000 feet down into the ocean. My house is about a mile from those cliffs. Not too long ago, I was sitting up there about 4 feet from the edge with my cameras, no guardrails or anything in Molokai, just looking out over the ocean. And all of a sudden, from below, hanging in the air, a frigate bird with an 8-foot wingspan, looking me right in the eye, not moving its wings, just hanging there on the air. And then it was carried up by the wind, and it was replaced by another and another and another, until 7 of them had graced my sight. And they all kept spiraling up higher and higher, so high I could hardly see them, and then finally the top one just dipped a little bit. And the others all followed suit, and they all turned and glided 8 miles across the channel to the island of Maui. And I was left alone, looking out over the ocean. And I thought, whoa, that was big. What does it mean? And I could almost hear Mother Nature whisper in my ear, and she seemed to say, DeWitt, quit flapping and ride your thermals. Quit flapping and ride your thermals. That was a little metaphoric even for Mother Nature, but okay. All right, maybe in my own life it was time for another reframe. Maybe struggle was no longer the operative word. Maybe getting to the next level really was about learning how to soar. All right, okay, so where do those thermals exist in our lives? Man, I was standing there on the edge. I had the guts to go to that edge and even beyond it in my photography, but I had a feeling that wasn't the edge that nature was trying to teach me about. I had a feeling that if I was going to get to the next level in my own life, it wasn't the external edges I'd have to press. It was the internal ones as well. To know myself as well as I knew my craft. Because in each of our lives, there is an edge between success and significance. An edge where if we're going to take it higher, we have to work not just on what we do, but on who we are. Not just to be the best in the world, but to be the best for the world. And it's with that realization that those thermals begin to rise. So I'm wandering around Molokai thinking, test my inner edges. All right, how do I do that? I thought maybe I ought to learn to meditate. Lived in California for 17 years. De facto, I should be a good meditator. I'm a terrible meditator. When I try and meditate, there's always a fly in the room, you know. There's something up my nose. My mind endlessly repeats the theme from the Beverly Hillbillies. Doesn't work. So I took a class. I took a class in meditation, and I'm seated in the back of the room. I'm trying real hard, and finally the teacher comes over and she says, "You don't do this very well, do you?" I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Well, maybe what you need is the one breath meditation." I said, "The what?" She said, "The one breath meditation." She said, "Everything you need to know about life is in one breath." I said, "Tell me." She said, "You take it all in and you give it all back. You take it all in and then you turn around and you give it all back. You publish it in your life. You put it out there without any regard to whether it's received or not, the very best you have every day." It's when God made us, he was afraid we wouldn't remember the meaning of life, so he just encoded it into the smooth muscle of our lungs so that every time we take a breath, we get it. Take it all in and give it all back. Can I do that? No, come on, I'm human. But boy, that little mantra makes each breath different, and then occasionally we all meet those people who do live that as easy as breathing. And they serve as touchstones to show us it's possible. I met such a person in Scotland's Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Harris. Her name was Marion Campbell. She was the finest weaver in all of Scotland. She'd been cited by the Queen. She was a national treasure, and she lived in the tiny town of Pockerpool. And I went there, I found her house, knocked on her door, she came out, lovely woman, and I was all excited and ebullient, and I said, "Hi, I'm from National Geographic, and I want to take your picture," and she raised her hand. And she said, wait, my brother is very sick upstairs, he may be dying, and I'm taking care of him. And I felt so stupid. I hadn't called, I hadn't checked. I said, "I'm sorry, Marion, we don't have to do this." I began to back away, and again, she stopped me. And she said, "Give me an hour and I'll be ready." And she closed the door. And I wandered around that little village thinking of the incredible presence of this woman. Why? Why, when her brother was dying, would she spend time with me? And then I heard her hand shovel being thrown across her room. And I found her in her weaving shed, lit only by the light of the window. And she showed me the yarn that she had spun by hand. And She told me how she went into the fields and literally scraped the lichens off the rocks to make her dyes. And I was still nervous. I took a couple pictures, portraits. I said, fine, Marion, I got it. I started to leave, and again, she stopped me. She took me back to her house, and she put out biscuits, and she'd make tea, and she wouldn't eat till I had eaten. And then she took me into her living room, and she stoked the peat fire. We sat there in the afternoon sun talking. And I was so struck by the presence of this woman, by her congruency. I felt I was seated with a great sage, you know, a veritable Yoda, and that any minute she was just going to reveal to me the meaning of the universe. And finally, I said to her, Marion, what do you think about when you weave? And she said, I wonder if I'll run out of thread. It wasn't exactly what I thought I'd hear. And then she must have seen my consternation, because she cocked her head just like this, and she looked me right in the eye, and she said, when I weave, I weave. And in my own mind, I heard, when I weave, I weave. When I photograph, I photograph. When I serve, I serve. When I take it all in, I take it all in. When I give it all back, I give it all back. There's no use walking anywhere to preach unless you're walking as you're preaching. And that evening, through her actions and her words, Marion Campbell showed me what it might be like to soar. She was who she was, with discipline, with grace, with service, with total lack of ego. She was a thermal rider. Not just the best in the world, but the best for the world. And she made it look so easy, she never even moved her wings. Could I do that? Could we do that? Find a new balance in our lives, not an either-or balance, but a both-and balance between what we do and who we are. A balance that will allow us to keep all of our passion and excitement and focus, and yet at the same time never lose sight of those things that were really important in life. A balance that would allow us to take it all in till we were full to overflowing, and then with gratitude and with grace, to give it all back. To be like the sunset, the banquet that nature sets before us every day, just putting it out there, the very best we have. I know that whenever I can do that, wonderful things happen in my life. A couple years later, I'm back in Scotland, this time not for the Geographic, but a big advertising shoot for Dewitt Scotch. And they sent me over there to photograph a Highland Games, these giant men throwing these weights around. And I couldn't get my eye off the guy over there on the right with the suit coat on. He was the judge. He was bigger than all the rest of them. And every time one of them would make a particularly good throw, his eyes would mist up. He'd get this little smile on his lips, you know. God, we shot some wonderful ads. But my intuition's just screaming at me to meet this guy. And so when it was over, I went to him and I said, yeah, you're bigger than all the rest of these guys. You've done this before? And he said, aye, Letty, aye. I was the champion of Scotland for many years. I said, what do you do now? He said, well, I'm a farmer. I was a farmer then, I'm still a farmer now. I said, can I come and visit you? He said, well, I guess you would. So I dragged my whole crew down there the next day. Big boy. He came out from behind the barn. We found this weight he hadn't thrown in years. We took him into his front field, and talk about being your own banquet. He was just lost in the very best he had to give. And so was I. I'd forgotten that I was being paid or shooting for doers. I was just falling in love through the lens. And the art director took my picture and turned it into this ad that said, for 25 years, Henry Gray won the cheers of the crowd at Scotland Highland Games. And even now, he likes to get out and throw his weight around in the privacy of his own backyard. And this ad won all kinds of awards. But I didn't care. I got to meet Henry. I got to meet Henry. I got paid off right there that day in that field. And a couple years later, I was back in Scotland, and I passed the town that Henry lived in, so I went over, knocked on his door, and he showed me how he'd framed up the ad that I'd sent him. And then he and his wife came out, stood in front of the house and posed for pictures. And then he said, come here, Natty. Come here, let me show you something. And he brought me over, and he turned that picture around, and it was covered with signatures. And I said, Henry, what's this? And he said, well, Natty, I'm that ad all over the world. And all of my relations in New Zealand, Alaska, Canada, and the US, they all saw it, and they all called. And they said, Henry, is that you? And I said, it's me. And they said, well, we think we better come back and check on you. And so because of that ad, they had the first Gray Clan reunion in more than 200 years. You know, we never know where it's going to go when we publish the best in our lives, when we give it all back, when we really care about the people in our church, where we really do inspire others to celebrate what's right with the world. We just have to do it and believe, because we are all of us, on the same great journey, a journey down a river we call life. And on that journey, we are each our own boatman. And if we're going to run this river well, we must first know our own boat. Know everything it will and won't do. Make an honest assessment of its strengths and its weaknesses, and then hone our technique until that boat is just an extension of ourselves. We must spend time not only with our outer edges, but with our inner ones as well, to align our vision and our values, because the way won't always be easy. And great possibility is always fraught with turbulence. We must learn to ride the waves of change, not to shrink from them, but to be right there, totally conscious, on our edge. If we're going to run this river well, we must be absolutely present. We must learn to trust in ourselves, to watch others run the river, to learn from them, but not to copy, because the river is always changing, and what made one run brilliant may make the next a disaster. But if we can hold our focus, if we can keep that vision clear, if we can live in principle every moment of the journey, then we can use the power of that river to take us where we want to go, to keep us from disaster, to send us through the chaos so that we can celebrate with gratitude and with grace all that we've been given, to take it all in and give it all back. It's your boat. It's your river. You're on it every day. So will we do it? Will we do it? Will we live with purpose and passion and vision and values? Will we open our eyes to an extraordinary vision? Will we stand on our own edge and ride those thermals to heights we've never dreamed of? Seize the day, my friends. Seize the day. Thank you very much.